Hello, welcome to lesson 2, blogging your business. Let's get down to business. I don't know why I always got to read the titles like that, all dramatic, like, I don't know. Anyhow, this is the second in our 17-part series called Unit 3, Communicating Your Message of Your Organization. I don't actually know if it's 17 parts. I think it's closer to 10, but there are a lot of parts in this lesson. Anyhow, welcome again. If you saw this lesson and you saw blogging, your heart probably got a little bit sad and you thought, oh man, I have to blog again. I blog in all of my other classes. Well, I'm here to tell you that this blogging is different because we don't care about your feelings here or what you're thinking. This is blogging for your business, and it's different because blogging for your business is situated within the context of your organization that you've chosen to work with in this class. And so it's not your feelings or your thoughts, it's blogging in an effort to further the mission or the cause of your organization. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Adam, why do we have to blog? Blogging is stupid. We have a website. That's where we put our information on the internet. And I would push back at that and I would say, well, the reason that we have a blog and a website is because people on the internet interact differently with blogs than they do with websites. Website is typically thought of as being like a place that you go to get information or fill stuff in or, like look up the hours of a store. A blog is different. A blog is for people that are bought into your cause. And it allows you to sort of interject some personality, into your web presence for your business that you can't do with a website. And let me show you, I have a little example here. This is the New York Times. I read the New York Times a lot. That's why I use it as an example. This is their main web page. And as you can see, I don't want to call it static because it's a really good web page, but its job is to communicate the news. That's what it does. It changes all the time. Nurse at Dallas Hospital tests positive for Ebola virus. This news will totally date this this video if they're still using this video like 5 years from now. They'll be like, oh man, remember when Ebola was in America? Anyhow, and just to contrast this, the New York Times actually has a blog as well, and it's called The Sixth Floor, Eavesdropping on Times Magazine. And this is for people that really care about the Times, possibly are big nerds, and want to get the behind the scenes, and so they want to read these things like, what did readers think about Larry Ellison's Island? Undercover, the thinking behind food and kids issue. Anyhow, and so what I hope to convey to you through this is that the blog is supposed to be the more approachable web presence that you have online for people to get at your business and for you to sort of interject your personality. It's a much more personal style. So let's go back to this web page over here because I've probably thoroughly confused you. All right, let's talk about our objectives for the day. We want for you, when you come away from this, to understand how blogs work. How do they work? And then you want to understand the role that blogs play in disseminating information today. I'm going to tell you that I'm about to wax poetic on you all in terms of how we communicate as a society. I went to journalism school. This is what I do. And then also understanding how blogging can advance your cause or business or organization, whatever that may be. And then we're going to talk about how blog writing differs from other styles. We have a whole video for that about like specifically writing, which shouldn't shock you because this is a writing class. And then lastly, we just want you to become a better blogger. So let's move on. Quick poll, because you all can totally raise your hands. Who has ever purposefully read a blog? Go ahead, raise your hand. Don't be shy. And then who has been forced to write a blog? I'm going to ask these same questions in class. And then who has willingly wrote a blog? Who posts regularly? There will be one of you. I know there will. Don't be shy. Raise your hand when that time comes. I have overly attached girlfriend over here at the right. I think her real name is Lena. I think she's from Georgia. And the irony is that people now stalk her. Anyhow, all right. So overview of where we're going. We're going to talk about where blogs came from. I'll just go ahead and get this out of the way now. Like way back in like 1992 or 4 or whenever it was, they developed these things called web logs, which are sort of like online diaries. And for about a week and a half, they called them web blogs. And somebody was like, you know what, we should shorten this. And so they just named it blogs. What are blogs? How do they work? tips for setting up and managing your own blog, how to promote your blog so that people actually hopefully read it. And then a whole bunch of stuff on the actual writing part of it. So how blog writing differs, how to choose a topic, how to craft a snappy title, writing the lead, which hopefully you guys are a little bit better versed in because you just did press releases, and then focusing on the so what and other things. And I'll tell you right now, and I'll repeat it throughout as we go, blog writing is very similar to news writing, but it's less professional, if that makes any sense. This doesn't mean that you can be sloppy and like spell things wrong and have awkwardly worded sentences. It just means that it's not meant to be quite as formal as what you would read in a newspaper. All right, so let's talk about the essence of blog. All right, so the essence of blog. This is the part where I wax poetic. What role do blogs play in society today? And to tell you about that, we have to go way back, way back, in talking about the history of publications. And so most of you in school today, you have to write essays. Maybe not so much in the ag sciences. Definitely if you were in English lit, maybe you can remember 2 to 3 years ago, NC 1111, NC 1101, whatever they call it here. Anyway, basic English where you have to write essays. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this like I do, but where does the word essay come from? And I'll tell you in just a moment. But first, let's go further back. In the nature of publication, like in the history of publication, that's what I should say, the barrier to printing and disseminating some information has always shaped the way that we write. And so if you think back to, the dark ages, in order to transfer information, in written format, was really, really labor intensive and really, really expensive. And so consequently, the only thing that got transferred was the Bible. And there are a couple other things too, but mainly the Bible, because, the European monasteries, the monks that lived there, they would dedicate like their whole life to painstakingly, transcribing and making these beautiful, reproductions of the Bible. So if you've ever been to the Library of Congress in DC, they have the giant Bible of Mainz, I think is how they say that. And it's actually drawn on animal skin, which they call vellum, and it's very pretty. Anyway, so fast forward to the year 1440. Who knows what happens in 1440? Okay, if you just shouted at the screen. Good for you. Anyway, that is when Gutenberg invented his printing press. And that changed things a little bit, right? Like now books are no longer have to be written by hand. We can mechanically print them and it made them cheaper. However, cheaper doesn't necessarily mean cheap. And so buying a book back then was like a big deal. It was really expensive, a lot like buying, textbooks today. And so consequently, even though we could print stuff, relatively cheaply and quickly, the things that got printed were things that were definitive works. So still a lot of the Bible, a lot of Cicero, a lot of Plato, things that were sort of like, seminal works that people wanted to have in their libraries. Things that had been around for a long time and people had not been able to get their hands on. Now they were able to get their hands on them. Fast forward about 140 years to the year 1580, and this guy named Michel de Montaigne, he's a Frenchman, changed the way that we look at things that are printed. And what he did was instead of writing a definitive work, he wrote what he called an essay. And it comes from the French word essay. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And it just means attempts. And so instead of writing something that was like definitive and then publishing it, he was like, you know what? Printing has become cheap enough, and there are enough printing presses in the world that we can now have conversations through writing. And so he just published a lot of things that were, attempts, like these were his thoughts. And then other people would write back and answer, and then this would be, in the common press, and people would read it, and everybody would get smarter. And so over time, these essays, as we use them now in academia, they've evolved into this sort of like formal, stilted sort of thing. When you have to write an essay for school, you're like, God, I got to write an essay, and it's a big deal. And I think that the way that we use blogs now in academia, at least, is that they're for that more informal discussion, like where you get to be creative. However, in the business world, in the world of communicating online, I think blogs sort of take that next step. Because basically all the barriers of entry to communicating online are gone. Like even 30, 40 years ago, if you wanted to communicate, it still cost you the money of, printing. And then when the internet came along originally, you still had to host a website and pay for somebody to build it, and then, write on there. And then blogs came along and they made it really easy. And so, to self-publish. And so now, like, blogs sort of fill and carry on that sort of discussion about any number of topics that this guy, Michel de Montaigne, started in 1580. There, all done waxing. All right, so elements of blogging. There's a solid level of narcissism that goes into it. Like, you have to believe that people want to read the thing that you're reading or that you're writing. But there's also documentation. This is the thing that's really interesting to me, documentation and aggregation. Whenever we look back at the Civil War era, for example, and we want to know, like what life was like in the Civil War era, we typically go to, printed things. And then what we read a lot to get into just the day-to-day of people is we read a lot of personal letters. So they have all these archives of letters. And that's really time consuming and painstaking, and those things are degrading over time. But nowadays, like, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, when people go back and they want to know what life was like for us, we have this like enormous aggregated amount of documentation of the everyday lives of people online in blog form. So to me, that's kind of cool. There's also an element of community. Blogs are all connected, and we'll talk about that later. So you're not just out there on an island with your website. You're part of a blog community, whether that blog is WordPress or Blogger or whatnot. It connects you, and that makes it better somehow. All right, there's Gene Wilder over there. All right, so why do you blog? Here's the graph. This is from a website called Technorati. They do every year the state of the blogosphere. And so you see down there along the bottom, we've got entrepreneur, corporate, professional, full-time, hobbyist. These are the different categories of people. But you see that most people blog to share their expertise and experiences with others. Others want to advance their career, further down, or their cause or whatever. So there's just a lot of, what you can see here from the top 3 or 4 things is that there's just a lot of sharing. Like, people want to share and connect with people online, and that's why they blog. And that's why your business wants to blog, because it wants for people to like it and connect with it, and then eventually buy its things, whether that thing is a product or an idea, if you're advancing some kind of cause. So why blog versus other platforms? And by other platforms, I mean like a website. Here are some things. You don't have to know HTML or CSS. You don't even have to know what those things stand for, because blogging, all of that is done for you, a lot of the behind the work. You basically just have to be able to follow instructions. Can you click next 5 times and enter your name? You can set up a blog. Congratulations. You don't have to mess with domains or hosting if you don't want to, in the way that you would have to do with a web page. You'd have to file a domain with like a GoDaddy or whatnot, and you don't have to find anybody to host the actual megabytes that make up your website. Also, because blogs are part of a connectedness, Google can find and index them better. Part of a connectedness. That didn't make any sense, but you see what I'm saying. Like, they're part of a system and a network of web pages, and so Google can find them and index them. And why that's good for you is that it takes you less time to start showing up in Google searches. It's not an automatic thing. It is pretty quick, but it's not automatic. And if you're out there on your own in like a website, it may take them a lot longer to find you, especially if nobody visits your website, because Google sort of uses that as a prioritization thing for its web crawlers. Anyway, you don't need to know about that. And then you're also connected to others who blog. And then a lot of times you can kind of convince them to advocate for your blog, and that lends third-party credibility, and we'll talk more about that later. All right, so what makes a blog a blog? Let's talk about that in the next video.
Say it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Have a good time. 'Cause it's all right. Whoa, it's all right. We're gonna move it slow.